Live from the Chicago Sun-Times, the leading candidates for governor are meeting with the Sun-Times Editorial Board to talk about the most pressing issues facing Illinois. Our election partner and sponsor is AARP Illinois, whose survey revealed Illinois' fiscal crisis should be the top priority for all candidates. Now, the editor of the Sun-Times Editorial Board, Tom McNamee.
Hi, welcome to our debate between Governor Bruce Rauner and Democratic challenger J.B. Pritzker. Thanks for being here both this morning.
Thank you.
It's great to have you. First, we want to tell those folks who might be watching this either on YouTube, Facebook, or on our website that if you're following the conversation on Twitter, you can use the hashtag #SunTimesLive, and we'd love to hear what you have to say, so please do so. The hashtag is SunTimesLive. We hope to have a really terrific debate. We'll try to keep it really tight. We'll ask both candidates to avoid their stump speeches and any filibustering. Not that you ever would do that, but we have to ask
Who would
the
want
question.
to do that?
At the same time, it's really important that we ask you to also have a real conversation. So we hope you'll jump right in there with thoughtful, provocative things to say. And first, I want to introduce for everybody who's asking the questions today. We are the Sun-Times Editorial Board, plus a couple of reporters. I'm Tom McNamee, editorial page editor. And right here to my left is Chris Fusco. He's the editor. And then we have Mary Mitchell, columnist. Next to Mary Mitchell is Tom Frisbee. He's a member of the editorial board and editorial writer. And then we have Marilyn Garcia, also an editorial writer and a member of the board. And Lorraine Forte, also an editorial writer and a member of the editorial board. And I believe next to her is columnist Mark Brown. And then Tina Svandelis, political reporter for the Sun-Times. And then, of course, once again, we have Governor Bruce Rauner and we have businessman J.B. Pritzker. We're going to go right to the news on the first question. Get a lot of thought to what the first question would be, and it's going to be this. Several states in the last few years have passed laws strengthening protections against sexual harassment. In Washington, Tennessee, Vermont, and Maryland, they have banned non-disclosure agreements as a condition of employment so that employees can talk openly about their experience in the workplace. And in Maryland, companies with more than 50 employees now must report the number of sexual harassment claims they settle. They also must report the number of sexual harassment claims they have settled over the last 10 years. So the question we have for you today, other states have taken other measures, and it's an interesting trend. Both of you, men, have great experience not only in public life, but also in private business. As an employer in those private businesses, have you ever required an employee to sign a non-disclosure agreement that would cover allegations of sexual harassment? That's number one. Number two, if you are elected governor or reelected, what steps will you take to strengthen protections against sexual harassment in Illinois? Governor, would you like to start first?
Sure. I have never signed an NDA in my life that would cover sexual harassment or anything remotely related to that. I have no personal NDAs whatsoever. In terms of the state of Illinois, one of my first acts as governor was to lay out ethics policies for my administration, and in there was a strict policy around sexual harassment, reporting it, prosecuting it, and having a zero tolerance policy within our administration. I've recommended similar legislation to be enacted in the General Assembly. Unfortunately, what's come to light over the last 3 years is there has been extensive sexual harassment and mistreatment of women and others in the legislature, in the Democratic Party, and Speaker Madigan has had his most senior, most trusted officers and lieutenants in the Democratic Party and in the General Assembly be accused of sexual harassment, and many have stepped down as a result. My challenger, Mr. Pritzker, was silent for over a week, wouldn't even say Mr. Madigan's name during those allegations and investigations. Mr. Pritzker has not been a strong advocate and champion for women on these issues, whereas I have. And I look forward to changing the culture in government, changing the culture in ways that we can stop this mistreatment, stop the sexual harassment and abuse, and I support the legislation that has been recently introduced that requires disclosure of any NDA that might touch on these issues in any way. That has been introduced in the General Assembly in recent weeks.
So let me be clear about two things, then we'll go to Ms. Pritzker. First of all, you have never signed an NDA, but you've also never required one of an employee that they signed ones, right?
That is correct.
Secondly, is there any specific legislation that is now is not now current that you would propose or sign? For instance, in Maryland and these other states, they actually have a ban now on NDAs for businesses of more than 50 employees. Would you support or propose such legislation here in Illinois, or something else very specific?
I would support that legislation that you outlined. Our administration is actually reviewing best practices and best policies in other states and in other settings, both in the corporate world as well as in the public service world. I believe that we need to take strong action on these issues. Our General Assembly has been slow to act. And I'll say that Speaker Madigan didn't even fill the Legislative Inspector General role for 3 years. There was no way for a woman who was mistreated to ask for an investigation. He specifically did not even have that office filled. And as a result, many harassment cases were never investigated. And I've talked to many women who feel like even today they are uncomfortable coming forward in the state government, in the legislature, because they believe that the system is rigged, that Speaker Madigan's control is too strong, and his oversight of the Legislative Inspector General and the system is such that they will not get justice if they come forward.
Did you ask him to fill it, the position? Did you ever advocate for it, press him, push him?
Many of us have in our administration. There is no reason for that office to stay empty, none. And it's the job of the Speaker to fill that position, and to have it empty for years, there's just no excuse, none. It shows the lack of concern for carrying out justice on all these issues.
So, Mr. Pritzker.
I have never signed NDAs or required NDAs that prevent people from reporting sexual harassment or keeping that silent. In fact, in our campaign we've done, and in our business, we've done sexual harassment training so that people understand what's not allowed in the workplace, but also what the reporting mechanisms need to be. That's something that needs to be strengthened in Springfield. Women who come forward bravely need to be believed. And after that, they need to have their claims investigated and by an independent investigator. And then we've got to make sure that those who are responsible for the sexual harassment or sometimes sexual assault are held accountable. Now, I really believe that this hasn't happened enough in Springfield. And I have called out Speaker Madigan, I have called out both Democrats and Republicans, because this doesn't just happen on one side of the aisle. There's sexual harassment in the Republican Party, and people should be held responsible there too. In our administration, Juliana Stratton's and mine, we intend to have independent investigations when people come forward. We intend to make sure that people are held accountable for their actions if they are perpetrating sexual harassment or, God forbid, sexual assault.
I know sexual harassment is an issue that doesn't necessarily know party boundaries, but at the same time, Speaker Madigan is perhaps the single most powerful person in Springfield, with all respect, Governor.
I wouldn't disagree with that statement.
and therefore, what he does is more important than anybody else. Sure. Would you agree that he has fallen short, though,
yes,
on handling the issue of sexual harassment?
Yes, and I said so, and it took too long to have those allegations
and
investigated.
You took a week to even say it.
I did call it out. The governor knows that. He's just playing politics with this. The fact is that in an era when we now have a Me Too movement, a Time's Up movement, it is critically important that we have processes for women to come forward and have those claims heard.
Well, I'm glad we're having our Speaker Madigan discussion up front, because that was going to be my subject of discussion, so let's go there.
Good.
And I was going to start with Governor Rauner, but actually, Mr. Pritzker, you provided us with a natural segue here. So if you're elected, you'll enter Springfield having never held any elected office, while Speaker Madigan holds the distinction of being the longest-serving House Speaker of any state legislature in the U.S. Obviously, by our discussion here, we also know he's a bit of a polarizing figure, right? Historically, some blame him for the votes that led to our state's massive pension debt, low credit ratings, and other financial problems historically. Are you concerned the Speaker has stood in the way of fiscal reforms in Illinois government? And what can you say to convince Illinoisans you won't be his puppet or under his thumb?
Well, I'm independent. I've been independent my entire life. You've seen the things that I've accomplished during the course of my lifetime. They had nothing to do with the Speaker of the House. That was expanding school breakfast to 230,000 more kids in the state of Illinois, thousands of kids getting early childhood education, and making sure they have child care. And you know that I helped to build, in fact, I led the building of 1871 and the Illinois Holocaust Museum. All of those things that I've been engaged in, and they're all public policy oriented, are things that I've done as an independent leader. I will not change when I become governor. I will remain an independent leader. Now, I believe that Speaker Madigan has made mistakes over the years, and that we need to change the way business is done in Springfield. I think you want somebody who is truly independent. You want somebody who is willing to stand up, but you also want somebody who's willing to work with the leadership in Springfield to get things done, because the biggest challenge we've got today is that we've had a governor who's been utterly intransigent, unwilling to work with people, unwilling to work with the mayor of the city of Chicago, the Speaker of the House. He's been unwilling to work with leaders in Springfield to get anything done. So no budget for 2 years, longer than any state ever in the history of the United States. A third year where he vetoed the budget. He walked out of the room unwilling to get budgets done, and people suffered all across the state of Illinois. You want somebody who's willing to stand up when it's the right thing to do, but also stay in the room to get the job done, particularly on a budget, which is a moral document.
So can you give us an example of your standing up when an issue that you felt was wrong? Tell us an example of when you stood up.
Sure. Well, I'll give you a couple of examples. One is that, when the marriage equality issue was brought to the state of Illinois in the legislature, this was a hard thing to get accomplished. You may recall that this was a very close vote. I really believe and have my whole life in LGBTQ rights, in equality, making sure that people have the right to marry. And when this vote came up, and there were people in Springfield, leaders in Springfield, who stood against it, I was there working to get the last few votes passed, to get people to actually sign on to that legislation.
Who were you working
so that it was
for?
passed. And I'm sorry?
What group were you working for, and were you just there as your own self?
I was asked by Equality Illinois and others. I've been involved with the Illinois Federation for Human Rights. That's the predecessor of Equality Illinois. That's how long I've been involved in this issue. In fact, all the way back to when I was a kid, when my mother was fighting for LGBTQ rights. So you want somebody who's willing to stand up when it's the right thing to do, but you also want somebody who's willing to compromise when that's the right thing to do. And when people are losing their mental health services and they're losing substance abuse treatment because Governor Rauner is totally intransigent, it is time for people to recognize that you want someone who will actually get a budget done.
Well, let's talk to Governor Rauner about the Speaker, even though he's brought him up several times already. So, you engaged in this political battle with the Speaker, led to a 2-year budget stalemate, dramatically increased the state's backlog of unpaid bills, with the interest alone costing $1 billion, a staggering number. Do you regret that stalemate, and how will you go about negotiating with the Speaker in the future should you be reelected?
That failure to have a budget for years is an act where every elected official let the people down, and I was part of that. But you know what? We have to change, and the simple fact is Speaker Madigan had a supermajority during the budget battle. He had the ability to pass any budget at any time with or without my support. He specifically did not want to have a balanced budget. He specifically passed a budget that was unconstitutional and out of balance the first year, didn't even pass any budget at all the second year, and could have passed any one at any time. And he made the statement in 2015, the first year of the budget fight, that what he wanted was to have the income tax go up.
But Governor, you
That
for
was
3 years
please, Mr.
didn't
Pritzker,
introduce a budget.
if you're going to interrupt, talk about your 26% tax hike, Mr.
3 years you
Pritzker.
went without introducing
All
a
right,
balanced
let's
budget.
get back to the question. Now,
So,
in fairness to your response here, the people elected you to govern,
Correct.
right? And
To stand strong for what's right. We have had decades. When I became governor, we had many billions of unpaid bills. We had some of the biggest unfunded
I guess,
pension liabilities
Governor,
in the country.
we understand that. I guess the question is this: there was nothing about Mike Madigan that should have surprised you, and you
no
were not.
surprises.
So to put the blame on Mike Madigan is to put the blame on the person you actually entirely knew what he was all about in his existence. Yet you failed to get a budget for 2 years. I don't understand how you can. We're looking to see what you would do differently.
So what we've proven is that eventually we can get a budget. We didn't do it the way we should have. We didn't get reforms in pensions, in government health care, in government consolidation. We got it through a tax hike that I vetoed because it was wrong. And Mr. Pritzker and Mr. Madigan are proposing another income tax hike on top of the one that we've already got, and $11 billion in new spending that
That's
Mr. Pritzker's
just wrong.
advocating.
That's untrue.
Tom, oh, come on.
That's
Tom,
untrue, Governor.
let's be crystal clear here. We will never have balanced budgets. We will never have a good future for the people of Illinois if our economy continues to grow slower than our government spending. Tax hikes will never solve the problem. Mr. Pritzker's only real policy recommendation is a tax hike with $11 billion
just
in
not
new
true.
spending, and that will break our state. People will flood out. Businesses will flood out of this state. We have to change the structural reasons that our government spending grows faster than our economy. That's what I'm working to do. A tax hike will only make that problem worse. And we have to stay strong on this point. We can't just throw up our hands and quit and say, let's raise taxes, give up on reforms, and hope that balances the budget. That will never balance the
We
budget.
want to give you an opportunity to respond to that, and then we need to move on to the next question.
We need real reform, there's no doubt about it. And we do have big differences of opinion about taxes, that's true. I believe that we need to change the tax system to make it fairer for people.
You need to pay
we want
your
to
taxes.
lower.
Okay.
We want to
Pay your
lower.
taxes.
So
Governor, would you
We
stop
want to let
interrupting?
him have his say so we can move to the next question.
We need to lower taxes on the middle class and those striving to get to the middle class. We need to lower property
And you're going
taxes.
to raise
Governor
them.
Rauner
You're going to
proposed
raise
$1
the
billion.
taxes on the middle class.
Governor Rauner, you
absolutely
proposed
will.
$1
Actually,
billion
we'll get to more
tax
detail
increase
on
on
the
property
graduate.
owners.
we're going to
$1
get
billion.
there. Don't worry.
Excuse me.
Let's talk about.
We'll
but-
get to the graduated income tax a little later in the debate.
But he's talking about balancing the budget of the state of Illinois, and I just want to respond that it takes three things to balance the budget. You've got to look at revenues, you've got to look at efficiencies in state government, and you've got to grow the economy. Governor Rauner has done none of those things. He's the biggest deficit
baloney.
spender in the history
We've
of the
grown
state of Illinois.
210,000 net
You are
new
the
jobs
biggest,
in
which
Illinois.
is lower than your predecessor in the
Gentlemen,
same time
This next question will
period.
give you an opportunity to just talk about your intentions, okay? And this question is for both of you. Unfortunately, for the last, four of the last 9 governors have gone to prison in
Yes.
Illinois for illegal acts.
And we could have number 5 right here.
You both have had ethical questions raised about you. Mr. Pritzker, your property tax breaks have come under scrutiny, and Governor Rauner, your administration's handling of the deadly Legionnaire's disease is under investigation by the Illinois Attorney General. What do these situations say about character? I want to start with Mr. Pritzker. When does, and we've all seen the commercials, so we know what you have to say about each other. We want you to talk about your character. When does a scheme cross the line and become fraud? And is it enough to expect that when a candidate follows the rules, voters should be satisfied with that and not see ethical lapses? Talk about what the whole property tax scheme.
So this was, as you know, an internal memo that was leaked for political purposes. That was actually confirmed this morning in another paper. Leaked for political purposes, and it was about the problems that they're having in the assessor's office. And you know, I've said for a long time now that there are real flaws in our property tax system that we have to address. I had a renovation project ongoing, And that renovation project was stopped because it was unclear whether the home would be sold or put up for rent. And subsequently, the renovation project was restarted. All the taxes that were assessed on the property were paid. But remember, this has been an effort by Governor Rauner, again confirmed this morning, to distract from his own property tax problem.
But I don't want to talk about Governor Rauner right now. I want to talk about whether or not taking advantage of loopholes. How does that reflect on your character that you were able to do that?
Yeah, but remember also that 54,000 people in Cook County seek to have their property taxes reassessed,
the people
including
of Chicago
Governor.
that way. That insults the people.
Look, you're on the attack because you're distracting from your own record. 22 reassessments you saw,
so the question,
illegal
the
homestead
bottom line
exemptions.
question is, are you saying that this does not reflect negatively on character?
No, and in fact, I am not saying that. I am telling you that the rules were followed here and that there were inaccuracies in that report.
Okay, fine. All right, and Governor.
Wait, there were inaccuracies in the Cook County Inspector General's report.
Yes, I've said that.
Okay, so Governor Rauner, at what point does a mishandling a crisis, such as the outbreak of the Legionnaire's disease at the Quincy Veterans Home, rise to the level of unethical or criminal? At what point?
The tragedy at the Veterans Home is one of a Legionella infection. It's heartbreaking. I went there immediately. Our team went there immediately.
6 days.
Took action every day to keep the veterans safe and the staff safe, and brought in immediately the national experts and did what was necessary to mitigate the risks. And there's been hundreds of hours of testimony, review by outside groups, by the legislature, by the national experts at CDC. And at no point has anyone ever said there was any unethical or criminal behavior ever.
There is a criminal probe.
So why do you think it's been investigated?
For political purposes. Mary, let's focus. Please let me answer this question.
Grand jury.
This is the most important question, because this election is about integrity and character. At no point has anyone, after countless hours of review, said there's any criminal behavior whatsoever.
There is a criminal probe.
Mr. Pritzker, please. Mr. Pritzker was investigated by a Democrat, not a Republican, a Democrat in the city of Chicago for months, reviewing emails, reviewing contractor reports, interviewing those involved.
Did a
and Mr. Pritzker,
report
please,
on
Mr.
your
Pritzker,
failings
your
that led to 14
fraud is what
deaths.
this is about.
Cover up
Mary,
14
let's
deaths.
focus. This is critically important. This election is about this issue. There was an investigation. He concluded, after the investigation concluded, tax fraud, mail fraud,
now talking
perjury.
Excuse me.
Okay, this is not partisan.
About...
And Mary, let me finish the point, please. This is important. Within 24 hours, Lisa Madigan, with no evidence whatsoever of criminal behavior, said she's launching a criminal investigation, Mr. Pritzker.
I'm going to let you respond to that. That would be only fair.
But I'm not finished answering the question, Mary.
Okay, let him answer, and then you finish, and we'll be moving on.
This is the core issue, Mary. The reason it's crystal clear, he doesn't want to hear this answer.
Excuse me, guys. Boys. We have to give you. No, please. We have. Mr. Pritzker, please. You have to take turns here a little bit, okay?
Give you an opportunity to respond.
This is the core issue. So within 24 hours, with not a shred of criminal behavior evidence, none, and no one claiming that there was any, she announces a criminal investigation of Quincy. Why? So that you guys in the press are talking about that to distract from the real criminal behavior, the real fraud that Mr. Pritzker has committed.
Okay.
That
Okay,
shows how rigged our system
we're
is and
done.
how broken our system is.
Mr. Pritzker, please respond.
Thank you. 6 days went by, 6 days before anybody told anybody else about the death and the sicknesses.
No criminal behavior whatsoever.
May I finish this? Governor Rauner's administration took 6 days to let people know. People got sick. 70 people have gotten sick. 14 people have died as a result of the mismanagement, fatal mismanagement at the Quincy Veterans Home. And there was a cover-up. There are emails that were uncovered. In fact, in FOIA requests, they were blacked out. because he didn't want to let people know what really was going on, which was an effort to cover their butts, to make sure that they weren't held accountable. They wanted to blame it on Senator Tammy Duckworth, who hadn't been there for years, and they wanted to blame it on the weather.
Okay.
That is what the governor has been saying about what is now a criminal probe into what
political
happened
purposes.
to 14 people who died because of his fatal mismanagement.
Okay.
It took 3 years to finally deal with it.
Well,
Governor Rauner,
we thank you for
3
that
years.
response. Thank you.
All right, let's move on to Tom Frisbee.
I have two related questions. I'd like to ask each of you one question. For Governor Rauner, I'd like to ask you this. The Sun-Times ran a series called 31 Bullets that laid out a number of reforms that could reduce gun violence. My question for you is, what specific laws will you champion if you get a second term to reduce gun violence in Illinois? And with